sneak around the house. I mean, they would sneak around the house, right? And kids were the wedge issue, right? And I think it's
Well, thank you very much. The Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations will now come to order. The Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations is meeting today to hear testimony on the Denial Playbook, how industries manipulate science and policy from climate change to public health. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at hearings are limited to the chairman and the ranking minority member. Therefore, I ask unanimous consent that all other members' opening statements be made part of the hearing record if they're submitted to the clerk by 5 p.m. today. Hearing no objection, so ordered. Welcome to the first Oversight Investigation Subcommittee of the 116th Congress. It's an honor to serve as chairman. Now more than ever, this subcommittee's mandate is important. We must work together to ensure the American people have a government that is transparent, and accountable to them. I want to thank the ranking member, Mr. Gomert, for his ongoing service to this subcommittee. My hope is that we can not only have a great working relationship, but we can find common ground in working for an effective, efficient, and responsive federal government that serves the best interests of the American people. Today's hearing focuses on the Climate Denial Playbook, and as part of this committee's month-long series on climate change. Let's be clear, climate denial is not a matter of scientific disagreement, but rather a set of tactics used by the fossil fuel industry to distort science to further their own agenda. Over the past few decades, we've seen a parade of industry-backed experts calling into question what is already the overwhelming consensus of the scientific community on climate change, creating confusion, uncertainty, and doubt in the public about one of the greatest national security challenges of our time. Today, we'll hear about one of the key plays in the Denial Playbook, something our witness, David Michaels, has described as manufacturing uncertainty or manufacturing doubt. Of course, this is not the first time we've seen this Denial Playbook put to use. The tobacco industry made it famous. Nearly half a century ago, a tobacco executive said that doubt is, quote, the best means of competing with the body of fact that exists in the minds of the general public, end quote. We've seen the NFL use the playbook to dismiss the role of professional football in causing a neurological disorder related to repeated trauma to the brain called CTE. CTE affects football players at all levels, as well as millions of players in other contact sports like hockey, lacrosse, or soccer. The younger the player, the earlier the symptoms show up. Symptoms include memory loss, aggression, depression, and dementia, and can appear decades after the last traumatic event. And the pharmaceutical industry has used the playbook to deny the addictiveness of opioids. Now that denial has helped drive an opioid epidemic that kills 130 Americans every day. It's created a new generation of kids who lost their parents to opioids. In each of these cases, the science showed a clear risk, but industry distorted the science to keep selling their product. According to the playbook, the messenger is just as important as the message. This means paying off thought leaders and established scientists to deliver an industry's message in peer-reviewed literature and media. It means vicious personal attacks on the reputations of independent scientists that criticize their product. And it means funding entire programs in academia and even in the U.S. government to conduct the research it wants, sometimes reserving the right to kill or edit studies that don't produce favorable results. This playbook has real consequences. Climate change has warmed the waters of the Caribbean Sea, fueling powerful storms like Hurricane Maria, a Category 5 hurricane with winds up to 230 miles per hour, nearly 12 inches of rain per hour. It devastated Puerto Rico, taking the lives of close to 3,000 people and driving nearly 300,000 to leave the island. In my home state in California, last year, it led to the deadliest wildfire season in history. According to the National Climate Assessment, rural communities face challenging obstacles in responding to climate change because they're highly dependent on natural resources. My constituents, the people of California's Central Valley, live in one of the most economically depressed parts of the country. We've been forgotten, but not left behind. But it's my constituents who have seen the direct impacts of climate change with our recent heat waves and droughts. It's only going to get worse if we don't work together and address the issues head on. And I'm committed to finding solutions for my constituents and the American people. A clear understanding of the magnitude of damage the Denial Playbook has had on working families in my district and across America is the first step towards fighting back against its harms. I look forward to adding to that understanding in today's hearing, starting with the playbook's most consequential use to date, climate denial. And with that, I now recognize Ranking Member Gohmert for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to start by congratulating you on your election to Congress and to chairing the first subcommittee hearing here today. Wish you well, look forward to working with you. This is now, though, the 7th oversight hearing related to climate change that the majority is holding this month. Starting with a full committee hearing, it's been a bit concerning how this all fits within this committee's jurisdiction. As Republican Leader Bishop stated at the full committee hearing earlier this month, we would ask that the majority, as was our practice when we served in the majority, to comply with Rule 4C of the committee's rules so that to the extent practicable, the majority staff shall make publicly available a memorandum explaining the subject matter of the hearing. This way, all of us, including the public, have a little notice as to the purpose of the hearing. It appears the witnesses invited by the majority today will focus on topics of discussion, including football, concussions, opioid addiction, OSHA, and epidemiology. These matters are all clearly outside the jurisdiction of the Committee on Natural Resources and its subcommittee per the rules of the U.S. House of Representatives. House Rule 10, which outlines the organization of committees in their jurisdiction, clearly indicates that matters related to commerce, biomedical research and development, as well as health and health facilities, belong to the jurisdiction of the Energy and Commerce Committee. Matters related to labor standards or occupational safety are most appropriately handled by the Education and Labor Committee. And we'll say, sure, there are things that we could agree on here. I think it is outrageous the way the pharmaceutical industry took advantage of how easily people were addicted to opioids and made big profits, but did massive damage to the country. But again, that's not within the purview of this committee. So when it comes to matters related to climate change, the House rules explicitly references several topics. Topics include those such as conservation of energy resources, almost anything to do with renewable energy, national energy policy, environmental research, scientific research, the National Science Foundation, and even the National Weather Service. None of these areas falls within the jurisdiction of this committee. Instead, these are unambiguously listed under the jurisdictions of either the Energy and Commerce Committee or Science, Space, and Technology Committee. What does fall within the Natural Resources Committee's jurisdiction includes wildlife conservation. That's exactly why this committee should be interested in focusing on modernizing laws like the Endangered Species Act. Last Congress, I introduced the SAVES Act, which was a bipartisan bill designed to enhance the conservation and welfare of non-native endangered species bred in captivity. Forests and public lands also fall within the Natural Resources Committee jurisdiction. Topics such as the need for long-term legislative solutions to continue and improve revenue sharing payments to counties through the U.S. Forest Service Secure Rural Schools program is critical. Over 700 counties across the United States receive funding from the program. I was just in Sabine County, probably my most rural county this weekend. They point out again, the county judge said back in the 80s we were getting around 1.6 million, not from taxpayer money, but as our share of the revenue off production of pine trees being harvested, a fantastic renewable research. Yet last year they got $64,000 as their share. It's hard to maintain a school in a county when the federal government has most of the land and you can't tax it. So these are things we ought to be dealing with. Based on the title of today's hearings, it seems that the majority is focused on science and public health issues, which are great. It's just we don't have that jurisdiction, but not within our jurisdiction. So it can be inferred from the hearing's title, there's industry denial about climate change. For whatever problems that climate change poses to the welfare of Americans, I hope we can focus on finding reasonable solutions and encourage innovation to address our problems. I don't think there's any denying we should seek practical policies to help reduce pollution, promote good environmental stewardship. The ideas of eliminating cows or air travel are not promising starting points. That said, it appears today's hearing topic is well outside our jurisdiction and per House Rule 10, and the reasons I've stated, I would move that we adjourn.
The ranking member moves that the committee now adjourn. The question is on the ranking member's motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the motion is not agreed
That's for
to.
the yeas and nays.
Is that a denial of fact?
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Cox?
No.
Mr. Cox votes no. Mr. Gomert? Mr. Gomert votes aye. Mrs. Dingle? Mrs. Dingle votes no. Mr. Gosar? Yes. Mr. Gosar votes aye. Mr. McEachin? Mr. Johnson? Mr. Johnson votes aye. Mr. San Nicolas? Ms. Gonzalez-Colon? Ms. Gonzalez-Colon votes aye.
The clerk will announce the result.
Mr. Chairman, on the motion, the ayes are 4 and the nays are 2.
Thank you. The motion passes. The hearing is adjourned.
Pleasure meeting you.
The official reporter is excused. We will now move on to a Democratic forum addressing the issues of which the subcommittee was going to bring up, which is once again how industries manipulate science and policy from climate change to public health. No, it's Mr. Goins. And thank you. I'd like to once again thank the witnesses for coming today. I'll begin to introduce them. Mr. Ryan Hampton is the founder of the Voices Project and advocate for those struggling with opioid addiction. Mr. Chris Borland is a former linebacker with the San Francisco 49ers. Ms. Alejandra Precoup is a validation specialist in Atlanta, Georgia, and a former resident of Puerto Rico. Dr. David Michaels is a professor of environmental and occupational health at the Millikan Institute School of Public Health at George Washington University. Under our committee rules, but since this is formed, oral statements are limited to 5 minutes, but your entire statement will appear in the hearing record. The lights are on in front of you will turn yellow when there's 1 minute left, and then red when time has expired. After the witnesses have testified, members will be given the opportunity to ask them questions. And with that, the chair now recognizes Ryan Hampton. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Ryan Hampton, and I'm a person in sustained recovery from an opioid use disorder. What that means to me is that I haven't felt it necessary to take a drink, a drug, or any other mind-altering substance since February 2nd, 2015. I celebrated 4 years abstinent from all substances at the beginning of this month. My recovery means that I'm able to show up for my community and call out the systems that have contributed to the deadly public health crisis that's claiming over 130 American lives every single day. It also means that I am living proof of the damage done to our country by the coordinated seismic misinformation campaigns launched against the American public beginning two decades ago by major pharmaceutical manufacturers and distributors. My personal experience with opioids is the same as many other people's. I injured my ankle while hiking and was given a prescription for an opioid painkiller. I didn't think twice about taking these pills. At the time, I was on the up and up. I was living my passion, working in the White House, and getting active in policy and politics. I knew that if I'd stayed on my path, I'd one day have the career I dreamed of. However, the lies that big pharmaceutical companies push to people like me set me on another path. After I took that first pill, my life was irrevocably changed. My daily use of prescription pills developed into a full-blown addiction in a very short period of time. We now know that taking opioids for more than 5 consecutive days significantly increases the odds of long-term use. The odds of chronic opioid use also increase when a second prescription is given or refilled. That was true for me. I became a daily opioid user, eventually injecting heroin. I was homeless, hopeless, and out of resources. I panhandled, got free meals at homeless shelters, and begged for help from anyone who would listen. My addiction stole 10 years of my life that I will never get back, and it all started with a pill. I didn't know it, but the doctor who gave me my first prescription and kept refilling it was incentivized by the pharmaceutical company that manufactured the drug. She told me what that company's marketing team had told her, that the pills weren't addictive as long as my pain was real, that they weren't habit-forming if they were taken as prescribed, and that it was unlikely for me to experience withdrawal since I was given the prescription in a clinical setting. Saying these things out loud, they sound absolutely ridiculous. They're fairy tales. Yet, at the time, this misinformation was accepted throughout the medical industry as normal, real, and true. I know this to be true from my lived experience and because since entering recovery, I've spoken with many physicians, such as some of my former doctors, who've confirmed with me throughout the course of these past 2 years through my research for my book, and told me that yes, indeed, these pharmaceutical companies push this falsehood early on. In fact, some of these doctors served or are currently serving prison time for their actions in misleading patients. These lies were not harmless. They were intended to boost Big Pharma's profits, absolve the industry of any responsibility for the deaths their products caused, and shift the blame onto the people they sickened. This link between pharmaceutical marketing and overdose deaths is not a coincidence. It's deeply ironic that the very people who were prescribed opioids are now being blamed for the opioid crisis. That's another Big Pharma lie. One of the world's most prestigious management consulting firms, McKinsey & Company, instructed Purdue Pharma on how to turbocharge sales of OxyContin, how to counter efforts by drug enforcement agents to reduce opioid use, and were part of a team that looked at how to counter the emotional messages from mothers with teenagers that overdosed on the drug. Richard Sackler of Purdue Pharma directed the company to shift marketing efforts towards blaming patients for the growing drug epidemic. In 2001, then company president Sackler wrote, quote, "We have to hammer on abusers in every possible way. They are the culprits and the problem. They are reckless criminals." Big Pharma is undercutting our defenses against the crisis as well. Consider that they paid millions of dollars in under-the-table donations to grassroots recovery groups, funneled through advocacy groups and other nonprofits. Consider that they continue marketing to doctors and other prescribers. It is painfully clear that Big Pharma is still playing a misinformation campaign to win. Because of corporate greed and misinformation, we are now in the midst of a massive public health crisis that killed 72,000 Americans last year. This isn't just about overdoses. It's widespread harm that touches every community, every neighborhood, and almost every family in America. When dangerous misinformation spreads at the level of the public's health and well-being, people die. I'm here today because I lived, and I can only imagine how many others might have lived as well if these large corporate conglomerates had only told us the truth from day one. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Hampton. And now the chair recognizes Mr. Chris Borland.
Thank you, Chairman Cox. I appreciate the opportunity to testify on industry's manipulation of science and policy as it pertains to brain injury in football. I was an All-American linebacker at the University of Wisconsin. In 2014, my first year in the National Football League, I led the San Francisco 49ers in tackles. I decided to walk away from the game of football after my rookie season in the league. While an active player in the NFL, I spent 6 months studying the available research on the ramifications of repetitive brain injury. In relating what I found in the research to my past experience with brain injury, I decided it was in my best health to stop playing football immediately. Per a 2014 NFL actuary, 28% of the league's players will suffer from cognitive impairment. I had a history of brain injury and played one of the most dangerous positions at middle linebacker. I feel that personal experience is important in deciphering such data. Since leaving football in 2015, I've advocated for players and families that live with the consequences of brain injury. I've gained a keen insight into the failings of industry-funded research. Today, we continue to see industry-funded science misrepresenting the reality of what football players and other athletes in violent games experience in their sport. While much of the focus with brain injury research in football has been on the NFL, I would like to highlight how the NCAA research into concussion is inherently flawed and why the NCAA fails to portray an accurate risk of brain damage for athletes competing under their organization. In 2014, the Department of Defense and NCAA collaborated to create what they call the Grand Alliance, a $30 million initiative to study concussion. Under the Grand Alliance, a program was launched dubbed the Care Consortium. CARE is an acronym for Concussion Assessment, Research, and Education. In the words of the NCAA and Department of Defense, the CARE Consortium, quote, serves as the scientific and operational framework for the concussion research initiative of the Grand Alliance. To date, $64 million has poured into the CARE Consortium. There have been 40,000 athletes studied, and the NCAA and Department of Defense report to have captured 3,300 concussions. Due to disincentivization in reporting concussions that I understand well as a former Big Ten linebacker, I believe the figure of 3,300 concussions flawed to the point of being unusable. My intimate relationship with this research specifically further bolsters my personal experience. The University of Wisconsin is a member institution in the CARE Consortium. I have played with many of the men that were participants in the study. I know that most of these men appear in the research as having never sustained a concussion. That is, they have never reported sustaining a concussion. In my experience in football, which is not unique to that of my friends and teammates, symptoms of concussion, whether they be dizziness, tinnitus, imbalance, or others, were weekly occurrences during the season. The NCAA and Department of Defense routinely fail to acknowledge when sharing CARE Consortium data that an estimated 1 in 8 to 1 in 20 concussions is actually reported. A second glaring omission is that concussion is not believed by neuropathologists to be solely instrumental in brain diseases like chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Focusing only on concussion ignores the repetitive subconcussive hits to the head that football players experience and are believed to contribute to neurodegeneration. To be clear, I feel the CARE Consortium does tremendous work researching concussion and developing protocols for those that have been diagnosed. My concern is that most of us athletes fall through the cracks. The CARE Consortium data fails to take into account the vast majority of concussions are not reported, and in focusing solely on concussion, does not capture what may be at the heart of the problem with brain injury in football, repetitive subconcussive hits. A true scientific and operational framework for concussion would include explicit acknowledgement that players so rarely report the injury. A genuine inquiry into brain damage from football must include mention of subconcussive hits. With the CARE Consortium, the NCAA and Department of Defense have done a good job of studying reported concussions. They've done a better job at distracting athletes and the public by excluding vital information in appropriate context. I deeply appreciate the opportunity to speak before you today.
Thank you so much, Mr. Borland and Mr. Hampton. At this point in time, we are going to have to pause the forum. Votes have been called. We will return shortly after the votes. Staff will update you. It should be some 30 minutes or so, but we'll have to run off and vote. And everyone can relax, grab a drink of water, or use the facilities. We'll be right back and re-adjourn. Thanks so much.
Are they still live streaming this?
Here.
porque los hotspots que están usando ahorita es en el declaration de emergency that it says anything. Or hay otros hotspots también que los the Republicans they're not going to vote for anyway.
Oh, they're not gonna vote.
Yeah, they weren't going to vote anyway. Por eso
So
porque
our
no está-
guys were voting.
Exactly. Yeah. Because our guys. Our guys were voting on more.
But Arnie was like emailing me saying he couldn't find it.
Now I understand.
Especially.
So the reason that they were able to do that is because they were not going to do this. So they came to create havoc here because they are not doing it.
Because they're going to lose anyway.
Bienvenida a la política.
It's my draft, I'm sorry. It's my wife.
Sí, pues sí, no veo.
I know that you are. You're in Bethesda, right? No, no. What?
No, no. It was a shenanigan from that they were not going to. So they stayed creative.
Yeah, that's true. But I do.
Because they were not going to
Something
vote
like
anyway. So they came here to wreck the action for because they knew they would have to. Since they were not voting on the regular vote, they came.
Marty's still around. I talked to Marty. Marty's actually